Hello, boys and girls. We are ready for Chapter 4 in our book, The Monsters of Morley Manor. The picture you are looking at is of Bunnyville Mill. Hopefully, while you live here in this area, you'll get to go out there and visit Bunnyville Mill. It's up by Bristol. So, Chapter 4, The Family Morleskovich. Putting Albert in the sink had made it act like a bubbling stew pot. Dropping in 4 monsters at once just about turned it into a geyser. Water sprayed everywhere, coming out so forcefully it hit the ceiling, not to mention splashing all over me and Sarah. As before, a weird green glow lit the water from within. The bubbling stopped, the glow faded. 4 coughing, gagging little monsters climbed out of the sink. They were wet, bedraggled, and extremely confused, but they were also overjoyed to see one another. "Melisande!" shouted Ludmilla. "Ludmilla!" shouted Melisande. They threw their arms around each other and hugged, and then Melisande looked up and spotted me and Sarah. Her snakes began writhing in horror, and she let out a scream. It was amazingly loud for someone so tiny. I heard an answering scream and realized Mr. Perkins was on the prowl. I wondered if he thought Melisande was another monkey. I shut the bathroom door, just to be safe. The other monsters had looked up when Melisande screamed. Their eyes went wide and they cowered together, except for Gaspar, the lizard-headed guy. He just closed his eyes and heaved a deep sigh. Despite Albert's attempts to assure Ludmilla and Melisande that Sarah and I were friendly, it took several minutes for them to settle down. When they finally did, Albert introduced first Sarah, then me. "They were the ones who disenchanted us," he said, sounding at least as surprised as he was grateful. Gaspar looked at us and then made a deep bow. It was clear he wasn't used to doing that because he bumped his nose against the sink. He stood up and straightened his lab coat, obviously trying to pretend the bump had not happened. And in a deep voice, with his long tongue flicking out and in, he said, "My profound thanks to you for releasing me and my family from our imprisonment." Albert had said something about family, too. "So you guys are all, like, related?" I asked. Gaspar smiled, which was somewhat terrifying, given how many teeth he had. "Well, Albert isn't actually family, although he has worked for me for so long that it often feels as if he is. But Ludmilla and Melisande are my sisters, and Bob is our faithful dog." "Dog?" cried Sarah. "I thought he was a werewolf." Gaspar made a hissing noise, which I found very disturbing until I realized it was laughter. "Bob is a were-human," he explained. "Most of the time he's a cocker spaniel, but when the moon is full he turns into something sort of like a human being. It's very frightening for him." Bob whined in agreement. Gaspar tapped the end of his long face and said, "There must be a full moon tonight, or Bob would have returned to his normal form. At least, I think he would. It's hard to say what we have been through would affect his condition. How what we have been through would affect his condition." "How did you get so small?" Sarah asked. Gaspar's eyes grew wide. "Treachery," he replied, raising a clenched fist into the air. "Foul, foul treachery. It was the work of my brother Martin. He was the one who shrank us." "Did he turn you into monsters too?" I asked. "Oh no," hissed Melisande, the words coming from the snakes on her head rather than out of her mouth. "We did that ourselves. Only we don't like the word monsters. We prefer to say we are special." "You wanted to be special?" asked Sarah in astonishment. Ludmilla smiled, showing her fangs. "Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time." Her accent reminded me of Bela Lugosi in Dracula. Since none of the others had that accent, and since she was supposed to be their sister, I wondered if she was faking it, or if it came with the transformation that had made her a vampire to begin with. Bob sat down and tried to scratch behind his left ear with his foot. He couldn't quite manage it, though. Melisande patted his head sympathetically and then scratched behind the ear for him. "Do you know where our enemy is?" asked Gaspar, his forked tongue flicking between his teeth. Now that we are free, there's a score to settle, and we must. Albert tugged at his lab coat. Listen, boss, there's something you need to know. What? Asked Gaspar impatiently. We've been asleep for over 50 years. Gaspar threw back his head and hissed in rage. He clenched his fists and waved them at the ceiling. His thick tail thrashed back and forth. Perfidy upon perfidy, he cried. Now does the world say, Gaspar, you were a fool to trust your scheming brother. He staggered and then gasped. Ethel. What about Ethel? Now, boss, said Albert, don't get yourself in a state. Who's Ethel? Said Sarah. Gaspar dropped his hands to his sides, chest heaving. He said, I don't wish to speak of it. His eyes narrowed. Does Martin still live? I hesitated, not sure how he would take the news. Well, he demanded. Well, I said, if Martin was the guy we used to call Old Man Morley, then he died last month. Gaspar hissed again. No chance to say goodbye. No time to heal old wounds. Oh, world, why must you be so dark? Suddenly he stood up straight and declared, We have to get back to the house as soon as possible. Why? Asked Sarah. It is the only way for us to return to our proper size, hissed the snakes on Melisandre's head, writhing in agitation. The only way? I asked nervously. Absolutely, said Gaspar. He sounded desperate. Everything we need is in my laboratory. Not only the scientific equipment, but also the ingredients for my spells. You use science and magic? Asked Sarah. Why does that surprise you? Asked Ludmilla, showing her fangs. Sarah shrugged. I don't know, it just seems kind of weird. Sarah's right, I said, which were words I almost never spoke. In the movies, they always use science or magic to do the stuff, but not both. Gaspar sighed as if it was an old argument. That represents a very small-minded view of the world, he said. But then people always do like to put things in little boxes. I didn't mention that he had been in a little box when I found him. It's like thinking that an artist should either paint pictures or make statues, but not both, he continued. But what law says you can't combine things? After all, the ancient Greeks used to paint their statues. I looked at him surprised. Are you positive about that? 'Cause I've seen pictures of those statues, and they sure don't look painted to me. It wore off, snapped Gaspar, his tongue flicked over his sharp little teeth, giving him a dangerous look. I decided not to argue. The point is, he said a little more calmly, you should not limit your possibilities. Actually, boss, Albert put in, the main point right now is that we have to get back to Morley Manor if we're ever going to get unshrunk. Gaspar put a hand on Albert's non-humpy shoulder. You are correct as usual, old friend. I glanced uneasily at Sarah and then said, Well, I'm afraid there's a small problem. Of course there's a problem, said Gaspar wearily. This is life. There is always a problem. Well, what is it this time? Then Sarah blurted out the answer. They're going to start tearing down Morley Manor tomorrow morning. All 5 little monsters began to carry on something awful. Melisandre's snakes had a hissy fit. Ludmilla turned into an inch-long bat and fluttered around like a moth at a candle. Gaspar put his arm to his brow like some tragic hero. Oh, grim and unrelenting world, he cried, tipping back his head, that a man's home should be so easily wrenched from his grasp. Does evil never take a holiday? Does sorrow never cease its sordid work? Don't worry, boss. You'll think of something, said Albert. At the same time, Bob howled a tiny, piteous howl. Oh, stop, Sarah said at last. If it's that important, we'll take you back tonight. We will? I asked in surprise. We have to, Anthony, said Sarah, her voice urgent. They need our help. I realized she was right. Tonight was the last chance the monsters would have to get back to their regular size. On the other hand, I wasn't sure that having them get big again was such a good idea. Did we really want 5 full-size monsters running around Owl's Roost? As if he had read my mind, Gaspar said, Not only is it the only way for us to return to our regular size, it is the only way for us to return home and, what is the phrase? Get out of your hair. Melissande's snakes hissed in agreement. This confused me. I thought this was where you lived. I mean, here in Owl's Roost. Or do you mean back to your own time? Our other home, Melissande's snakes hissed, beyond the starry door. What's the starry door? Asked Sarah. Never mind that now, snapped Gaspar, giving Melisande a dark look. If we don't get back to Morley Manor before they tear it down, we'll be stuck in this size forever. And we will have to stay with you, added Ludmilla, who had morphed back to her human shape. Then she licked her lips and grinned in a way that made me feel very uncomfortable. Ludmilla's grin settled it. While it might be cool to have monsters around for a while, I didn't think I wanted to be a permanent situation. Who knew how long Ludmilla could control herself? But as much as I wanted to help them, not to mention get them out of the house, I was still a little bit nervous about what might happen when they get back to full size. If we do help you get big, you won't eat us or drink our blood or anything like that, will you? I asked nervously. Gaspar was outraged. What kind of people do you think we are? He cried, his eyes blazing. I spread my hands. I don't have the slightest idea. Ludmilla put a hand on Gaspar's shoulder and whispered in his ear. I could see him relax a little. And turning to me, he said, My apologies for your outburst. Your concern is not unfounded. Let us see if we can reduce it a bit. Family, assemble. Quickly, all 5 monsters got in a line. Placing his clenched fist over his heart, Gaspar said, In return for your assistance, we pledge to you... He paused and then looked at us curiously. What are your names, please? I'm Anthony, and this is my sister Sarah. Gaspar nodded solemnly. In return for your assistance, we pledge to you, Anthony Walker and Sarah Walker, our friendship, our support in time of need, our sacred honor, and our hope for a better tomorrow. Thus speaks the family Morleskovich. Thus speaks the family Morleskovich, shouted the rest of them, except Bob, of course. Then all 5 monsters made a deep bow in our direction, and I noticed that Gaspar managed to keep from bumping his nose this time. Morleskovich? Asked Sarah. Our name before we came to America, said Gaspar. We only use it for our most serious oaths. Well, they could have been lying, but we decided to believe them. It wasn't as if we had much choice. Well, we'll have to get dressed, I said. We will wait for you here, said Gaspar. I opened the door to the hallway, and to my horror, Mr. Perkins came bounding into the room. I tried to catch him, but missed. Hissing and snarling, the vicious monkey headed straight for our tiny friends. And that is the end of our chapter, boys and girls.